Okay. Welcome to my channel. Do some a little bit different content today. If you like this kind of stuff, leave a comment below. Maybe I'll do more of the same in the future. This is the Labor Day incident. It is a fictional account of an event, I would say somewhere in the future, not too far in the future, perhaps even the lifetimes of the people living here today, living alive today. In this fictional account, the characters are, of course, made up. The places are largely made up, except for obvious place names. And this docudrama is entirely unscripted. If I make mistakes, if I leave parts out, if I flub it up, that's why. I've given some thought to it, and actually, I've been thinking about this topic for a long time. So some of the themes in here are fairly familiar to me. They may not be fairly familiar to you. We are venturing into what will seem like science fiction. It is fiction because it hasn't happened yet, but the science is reasonably good, meaning I am discussing events that have not happened in human history, or perhaps even recent, history in the evolution of humans, but which could happen and are considered at least theoretically possible. And given our transition right now with global heating proceeding unabated and fossil fuel consumption likewise proceeding unabated, the likelihood of the scenario I am outlining here in this dramatization is fairly likely. So with that in mind, trigger warning, there is some fairly graphic descriptions in this. People who have survived hurricanes or tornadoes may find some of it difficult. People who are a bit squeamish may find some of it difficult. Again, this is unscripted, so we'll see where I go with this, and we're going to go there together. All right. I think that's all I need to say in advance. Hold on a second. Hi, everybody. So who was it that organized this? Grace Tan, was it? Oh, you're Grace. You're behind the camera? Okay. Glad to see you finally, Grace. Get to meet you in person. And sorry I was kind of difficult about organizing this whole thing, but I'll explain that in a moment. I'm not usually that difficult to work with. So you wanted to talk. I guess you got some questions. Okay, let's just stop right there for a second. Listen, I want you to understand one thing about why I'm here talking to you and why it had to be on this date. For the last 2 years, I have been hiding behind, I guess, an NDA. The government, as a prerequisite for a certain amount of protection, required me to sign an NDA. I and my family were, as everyone in the world by now knows, I and my family were rescued from the Florida Panhandle 8 days after the incident in question. And I was required to immediately sign an NDA that I would not discuss this incident with anyone, the press, any government agencies outside of the Department of Homeland Security, foreign or domestic. And this will be for 2 years. And the importance of today's date and why I agreed to this date and not any of the other earlier ones that you proposed is because yesterday that NDA expired. It's been 2 years. It's been a difficult 2 years, in part because not being able to talk about something this important is it's been really hard. So now I can, and when you contacted me 3 months ago, I wasn't sure I even wanted to, and my wife asked that I not. This has been really traumatic for her, and I had to give a lot of thought to that. And after a lot of soul searching, she agreed that maybe I should, and so I'm here. You can ask whatever questions you want. The NDA expired. That envelope I handed you when I came in, that contains a copy of it. So if you have any qualms that you might be wading into deep waters, you could take that. There's some redactions in it, again, to protect the privacy of myself, my family, our children in particular. And you can take that to your counsel and make sure that you're doing the right thing and that you're not going to get in trouble. I don't want you to get in trouble. I think I'm fine. I have my own attorney. Her card is in the envelope. And she has assured me that everything is fine. And today is the earliest day that we could do this. So again, Grace, sorry for being so difficult. Now you understand. So I had to get that out of the way right away. If you want to stop right here and take this matter to counsel, I would really understand that, and we can actually schedule again, but I'm here. So if we want to do this, let's do this. Right. So my name is Stanley Cruikshank. Sure. Stanley, Cruikshank. Yes, I'm a forensic engineer. I'm a junior partner in a firm located in the greater Houston metropolitan area. I live with my family in a suburb outside of Houston. I won't be using any names of my family or my children or my wife in here. And if I accidentally do that, I'll ask you to edit those out in post, if you would, please. Yes. So forensic engineering, what is that? So we like to joke, it's the kind of the CSI for building collapses. I laugh because it's not funny, of course. These are very often very nasty and very unnecessary types of things. And I travel a lot. I've seen a lot of horrible things. I've learned to accept things as they are and see what's on the ground. And to be honest, I spend a lot of my time in courtrooms with lawyers on either side, having to be very careful with the words I say. But, it's an acquired skill, right? You just do what you have to do. And it's exciting. I like it. I like the work. That's actually how I met my wife. She's also an engineer, structural engineer. And we met at some sort of academic decathlon. I think it was a high school event for high school students where they were asked to solve engineering problems, and we were invited to score those solutions. And it was great. And we had a lot of fun. And she and I met. And, we both lived in the area, the region. And so we hit it off. And she's a really smart lady. Helped me run my business. Having an engineer in the background has proved to be really critical, and I appreciate, all her help, and I appreciate her resilience over the last 2 years. Okay, so why were we in Florida? So my wife actually is from Florida, and she still has family. Words are kind of funny, right? She had family. She had family in Florida, and her sister had inherited the family farm. It's tiny. We had been there. I'd been there once before after our first child was born, and oh yeah, we have two daughters. One is, well, at the time, one was 7 and the other was 5. And after our second child was born, we kept trying to find opportunities to go out there and see the old folks and see the old homestead. And my busy schedule, being a partner in a firm and so many buildings falling down, that it just never seemed to happen. So finally, her sister called for a kind of a family reunion. The old people were fading, and we just all kind of rallied behind the idea of all coming out and visiting the old family homestead. There are 4 children in the family, and all have children, and all live in the Southeast. So it would be good. It would be good to see them all. After the old folks die, there's not as much impetus for these kinds of events. So we picked a date. Look, I had a little hole in my calendar for inspections and lawsuits and all this kind of stuff. And I had, I got a billion frequent flyer miles, so we were able to fly the whole family out. She organized the whole thing, and I found out about it later. We were going to fly into Tallahassee and rent a car and drive to a little town. The whole area is rural, and it's a mixture of forested bayous and agriculture land of different types and orchards, and then these little scattered homesteads that sort of represent the old Florida. You don't see too much of that anymore. Places tend to get really developed. So she organized the whole thing and went off like clockwork on a Wednesday before the Labor Day weekend. We caught a flight out of Houston, a little regional jet, and flew us to Tallahassee, rented a car, and drove out to a community near the homestead, not too far. I think it was maybe 10 miles, maybe 5 miles. Hard to tell with those roads. Everything's really slow out there. So some small distance, and we got lucky. We found I don't know what you would call it. It was like a farmhouse, but it had been developed into a bed and breakfast, and they had extended stay accommodations, and we were going to be there for about 7 days. So we thought, yeah, children, have like a little more room to bounce around in, actual lawn outside, and a kitchenette, and a refrigerator. So it sounded really great, really cute. We drove from the airport, Tallahassee International, and in our car. We stopped along the way because we were going to be staying at this place for a while. So we grabbed some food, healthy fruits, vegetables, healthy snacks, and some bottled water. And in no time at all, we were at our I guess you could call it a motel. And we checked in, we got into our rooms. It was really nice, very sweet. And my wife was calling her sister saying we were in town. And of course they wanted to see us, and everyone was so excited. And so we drove out to the farmstead, and the countryside is beautiful. There's nothing bad to say about it. Back then, before. And so we were invited out, and we knew we were going to be there for 7 days. We got there a couple days early to beat the rush, and we planned on staying a couple days after and take our time going home and just kind of enjoy the countryside, do some sightseeing. It's my wife's old stomping ground, so there are all these places she wanted to go to, and so the trip was as much for her as anybody else. And of course, now she has children of her own, and she wanted them to see the sites that she was familiar with. So we just wanted time. We didn't want to be rushed. And so we showed up at the house. We checked in and immediately went to the old house and had a really nice time. The old folks were so happy to see the girls and so happy to see their daughter, and it was great. It just felt great. I just, you know, I get stressed and I think about work too much. And I brought my laptop computer on this trip, and my wife begged me not to. And I said I wouldn't open it. I promised I'd only open it with her permission and the whole thing. But I did bring it. She relented. But it's just so hard to get away from work. And when you're a junior partner, and I mean, really, there's so many lawsuits, there's so many attorneys, and there's so much prep, and everything is serious. Everything is $1 billion project that went bad, and so just have a time to just unwind. It just felt great. I felt so relaxed when we got there. And we had about 2 hours of visiting, and then they were going to have their family meal. It was just the regular family meal. The big meal, the big family reunion would be Sunday and Monday, in keeping with the holiday. So we just, no trouble for us. We were going to sit down and have the family meal, and after that, we stayed and visited for another couple of hours. But the girls had gone outside to play, and I thought, being an urbanite, I thought that the children would be bored out of their skulls. But it was exactly the opposite. They just came alive, and there was a horse, and there was a cow, and there was a pig. I didn't tell them what the pig was for, but they didn't need to know. And there was a whole yard full of chickens. When I got out of the car, there was a yard full of chickens. And all this grass and this sloping natural, kind of a natural turf down to a bayou a ways off. And so, we played with the girls and showed them all the animals. And my wife put them up on the horse's back, and the horse was very well behaved. And they got to sit on the horse and play. And then there was a swing, an old rusted swing set that had been there since my wife was a child. And it didn't look any too safe to me, but engineering instincts, right? But it worked fine. And she swung the girls in her old childhood swing set, and it was magical. It was magical. And I'd never seen her so happy. As a woman and as a mother, you could just see that it was just everything to her, and that's fine. And I was very happy. It was really about her and the kids. It wasn't really about me. After dinner, we sat around and told stories, and old home on the farm. The old folks were talking to my wife and talking to the other sister and her husband, who was kind of also from the area. And they eventually got to talking about going to the beach. The beach was less developed back in the day. And it was, I guess it's that part of what they call the Big Bend of the Florida Panhandle, something like that. Kind of pulling a blank. But anyway, they used to drive down there, not too often, but a couple times a summer, and they'd go to the beach. And she had really fond memories of going to the beach and playing in the water and just really enjoying that. And as soon as our eldest child, the youngest, actually fell asleep, but as soon as the eldest, the 7-year-old, heard about the beach, she was all over going to the beach. We have, beaches in Texas, but they're pretty heavily developed and, urban beaches, I guess you'd want to call it. But these were isolated rural beaches, and it sounded like a lot of fun to me, and the girls would really enjoy a different slice of life. So we went home, and everyone was tired, and we went to bed. Now, it's kind of a rule, and if you live near the coast, especially the Gulf Coast or maybe even the East Coast of the U.S., there's sort of a rule that before you go to the beach, you check the weather. You check ocean conditions and beach conditions. So I had my laptop, and so I opened it up, and the girls were asleep, and my wife was laying down, and I checked on the conditions, and I had I'd heard before we actually left. I had heard. I did some checking because not like we wouldn't go, but I just kind of wanted to know what we were in for. And the conditions were great. There was a tropical storm or something south of Cuba, and but it wasn't even being tracked by the National Weather Service yet. So that was fine. Far enough away, moving slowly, not a big deal. No one seemed to care. And that night, though, as we were talking about going to the beach the next day, um, I checked again, and the tropical disturbance, that's all I really cared about. There was nothing else going on. Had crossed Cuba and was back in the Gulf of Mexico and was expected to strengthen a bit. There was the cone of uncertainty. Maybe you're familiar with it. As each day progresses in the projected path, the cone of uncertainty gets bigger, meaning the weather could go anywhere in that cone of uncertainty. And the cone of uncertainty they had drawn for this particular system was really big, and I was kind of wondering about that. And they said in the description that the steering winds were really weak, and it was moving slowly, and where it was going to go was hard to determine, and the pattern of intensification was undetermined and not expected to be a problem. So it could end up anywhere, and it might not even rain. Who knew? So that was good enough for me. So we got up. The girls don't get up real early, especially when we're on vacation. They don't have to go to school. And we slept in. The place we were staying had sort of a little buffet breakfast, I guess you'd call it. It was, toast, cereal, fruit, some other little things. And so we took advantage of that. It had been developed. It was more like a motel. It was sort of a bunch of bungalows and then some more down the side. And there was sort of a driveway in the middle. It was gravel, but there was a driveway in the middle. And the buffet was sort of where the office was. The office was closer to the main road. So we packed up some stuff in the car, in the SUV. We had this luxury SUV. Can't remember what it was. It was either a Escalade or a Explorer or something like that. And we packed everything. We packed some stuff into the car, beach towels, sunscreen, some other things. And some of the food we had bought on the way because we weren't too sure what would be available at our destination. We were going to sort of a wild area of the beach, as my wife remembered it. Things change, but that's what she remembered. So we brought some food and some water and set off. Called into the sister, and said we were going to the beach, and we'd be back at 1 or 2, and and of course they invited us to come by, more visiting and stay for dinner and all that. So it was going to be a casual day. There's decent highway access, and so from where we were staying, south of Cottonville or Cottontown or something like that, it wasn't too long of a drive. About 50 miles, maybe 60. I wasn't even looking. Took about an hour, maybe a little longer, but it was beautiful. The countryside's beautiful, the bayous and the farmland, even, and the little farmhouses, and it was just gorgeous. And we got to Mexico Beach, and I was trying to remember how I heard about Mexico Beach, and when I got there, I remembered. Mexico Beach. I had to look it up on my phone when we got there. Mexico Beach was pretty much leveled by Hurricane Michael. Hurricane Michael, 2018 or something. Hurricane Michael, and it was really bad, and I recalled it being bad, and I recalled Mexico Beach was bad on several levels. There was something out in the Gulf, a little tropical depression or a small tropical storm, hurricane category 1 or something, and no one was really worried about it. And then it crossed the Gulf of Mexico at an angle and fetched a lot of water and hit a lot of hot water, and it spun up. And it spun up so quickly that really even the National Weather Service, the Hurricane Center, couldn't really get the warnings out in time. So that was a scene. I kept that to myself. I don't even know that my wife knew about it. She didn't mention it when we were there. And I didn't want to mention it in front of the girls, of course. We were there to have fun, but it just struck me as we were driving through Mexico Beach. It looked like a war zone. There were new homes, there were new businesses, everything was clean, but then there was all these empty lots, just lots with just slabs or foundations, and if you're a forensic engineer, you kind of know what you're seeing when you see stuff like that. You look at it and you say, "Wow, something happened here. Something happened here." And I kind of knew what happened because I remembered it in time to look it up. And there were still houses on stilts, poles, and then there were poles without houses on them. And what do you make of that? And anyway, we made it to the beach. There were places where you could park and walk down to the sand, and so we did that. There were people. There were other people on the beach. It's middle of the week, so not a lot of people. It was the Labor Day weekend coming up, but it wasn't the weekend, so we kind of had the place to ourselves. There was a guy with a cart, a little trailer that he drove out onto the beach behind a little golf cart or something, and it looked like he was selling bait or thing. People were fishing poles, were buying things from him, and so of course the girls went nuts. The water was beautiful, the waves were coming in, washing up on the beach and turning over the sand and bringing shells up and all this kind of stuff, and they were having a great time. And I was on the beach and I was looking at the community, what had happened to the community. Once an engineer, always an engineer. And when I looked south from where we were, I saw this. Well, it was really two colors. It was a bank of weather. It was two colors. The top extending up into the sky with these white cumulus clouds, meaning a lot of uplift. And below that, and there's really stark contrast, almost artificial. It was so stark that it didn't look real. It looked like an alien landscape with this black band, just black, just not gray. I know what gray is. It was black, and it went, and it was like this. It went from there all the way across, all the way over there. It was like a quarter of the circle of the sky around you. You were to turn in a circle. A quarter of the sky or so was this black band that disappeared into the trees and extended out into the Gulf of Mexico and just finally just disappeared. And I wasn't expecting that. I think I wasn't expecting that. So I've seen a lot of hurricanes approach. I mean, I live in Houston. I've been on the beach. I've seen hurricanes come in. I've gone down to the beach to watch a hurricane come in. It's dumb, but people do it. Why do we do it? I don't know. It's like bearding the lion, right? That the sting is coming and you're not going to be afraid of it. You're not going to let it intimidate you. And I've gone down to the beach and I've watched hurricanes of different types, category 1s, category 4s, approaching, and the waves rolling in and the white tops, the white caps, whatever they call it, the foam blowing off the top of the waves with the wind. And so I've seen these things approaching, and some of them are turn out to be bad, and most of them turn out to be whatever. They hit the swamp, or they hit the open land 10 miles up the beach or something like that. And you don't worry too much about them. But this thing I was watching, it's this black band and all these white clouds, and then far up these wispy cirrus clouds spinning out from it. And as I looked at it, I could swear I could see motion, that it was moving. It was moving. And it had to be a far away. What was it? 400 miles away? I don't know. But I could swear I could see motion in the clouds and in the front of it. And I did something that you do as an engineer. I took a measurement of it. And the way you do that is you have your hand and you hold it at a set distance and you measure how many fingers. So without your thumb, how many fingers? And it was about 4 fingers. And that was a lot. That's, given the distance, it was really high. And so I told myself, okay, I'm going to come back. I'm going to measure this again to see if it's changed. So we kind of got caught up in things, and we had probably 4 pounds of shells at some point. And we were starting to get a little bit hungry, and we had food with us and bottled water. And so we were doing okay, but it was like, yeah, maybe it's time for lunch. And we kind of have to get back. And, we said we'd be back at 2 early afternoon. We're going to go back to the sister's house, sister-in-law's house. And so we were ready to go, and the girls didn't want to go. And we walked up the beach a little further, and all right, time to go. The girls didn't want to go. We walked a little further up the beach, and my wife and I were talking, and we were having a nice visit. We haven't had much time together because of my professional career. And a lot of the time when we are together, we're working together, and that's not quite the same thing. So we were just enjoying the beach, and we just kind of got caught up in things. And we got to a point where there was another guy selling bait. We were, I don't know, half mile up the beach, quarter mile maybe. He was selling bait. And so I kind of asked him, so how was the rebuilding going on with the community? Hurricane Michael, it seems like it was a long time ago, but I don't see a lot of rebuilding. And he just kind of blew it off. And he said, I see the neighbors every day. Everyone's rebuilding. They've all got, they all got their permits pulled. There's FEMA money. This whole community is going to come back. Florida's strong, Mexico Beach strong, and got strong community values, and we believe in God, and nothing's going to keep us from enjoying this beautiful part of the country. And I was like, wow, good for you, but that does not comport with reality. I just drove through this community. I just walked up the beach, and I didn't see much of anything like that. It's good to be upbeat, right? But it just seemed sort of detached. And I said, well, I guess, you just have to live with hurricanes. And he said, no, we don't get hurricanes. We got a storm and it caused some trouble, but we just don't get hurricanes in Big Bend. We don't get hurricanes in the Florida Panhandle. You have to go to New Orleans to Louisiana to get hurricanes. Knowing what happened and seeing the proof on the ground, I just couldn't understand where he was coming from. And it kind of set off an alarm bell. I was, we were at the old folks' house, and they had the TV on. They always have the TV on. And we were listening to the news. One ear listening to the news, and the weather came on, and I thought, well, maybe they'll mention something about this storm coming into the Gulf. And they didn't see a thing about it. It's just like, go to the beach. It's wonderful. Plan your weekend at the beach. Get there ahead of the crowd and plan to stay the weekend. And there's lots of cheap rates on rooms. And it was less a weather report than it was like a message, advert from the Chamber of Commerce. And it was really a bit unsettling because, in my experience, if there's any tropical disturbance or tropical storm entering the Gulf of Mexico, the weather people get real serious about it. They'll say, okay, here's the track, here's the noodles, here's the cone of uncertainty, here's the wind patterns, and here's the upper level shear, and here's the the steering winds, and they just go all into it. And generally you're watching it and paying attention. And, these people were saying nothing about it. And this guy on the beach, he's like, we don't get hurricanes. And I knew for a fact they did. I just drove through the ruins of this hurricane. And talking to him, the hair just rose up on the back of my neck, and I turned around and I looked south down the beach, and it was there. There it was. It was right there. And I took my hand and my four fingers, I put it back up, and I said, wait, maybe I'm wrong in it. And the dark band was twice the height of my hand. Twice the height of my hand, and the clouds were almost overhead. And I couldn't reconcile it. I was looking at it in my engineered mind, and I had the data right there. I just took the measurement myself, and I couldn't reconcile it. It was supposed to be a slow-moving storm. How could it come in this fast? We're going to get rained on. And then I realized it wasn't the speed of the hurricane. When the last I had looked at it, the wind field was really huge. And it suddenly occurred to me that if that thing spun up with a wind field that large, then it wouldn't have to be moving fast. It would just grow across the landscape. And what we were seeing was growth, rapid intensification. And this happens a lot. This has been happening a lot. It's like it's a global heating thing. It's like the waters are so hot that when these storms, which are moving slow, park over hot water, they intensify, and they suck all this energy out of the water, and they get big, they get fierce, and they get large. And Harvey did that. It came ashore in Texas. It came out of nowhere, and it was nothing. No one was watching it. No one cared. And then, like overnight, it intensified into this monster. And I swear it nearly destroyed Southeast Texas. It was just incredible. It was unbelievable. And it's like no one was ready for it. And Hurricane Michael did the same thing. It just came out of nowhere. No one was ready for it. And here I was on this beach at Mexico Beach in the cone of uncertainty. But I wasn't uncertain at all. I knew it was coming, and it was growing. And I could see with my hand that it was twice the size that it had been just 45 minutes before. And I didn't want to frighten my wife, and I didn't want to frighten the girls, but I wanted to get out of there. I wanted to get out. Do you know that? Have you ever had that feeling where you just want to get out? Like you're in a crowd, maybe you're in an event, and what is it? You hear something, it's a voice, a scream, loudness, people arguing. There's something you hear in the crowd, and you can't see anything. You don't know what's going on, but you just feel like you just got to get out, right? You got to get out. And that hit me, and I could feel the hair rise up on the back of my neck. That we were in a bad place. We were in a bad place. I didn't know how bad. It didn't matter how bad. I got a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old, and we're not anywhere near home. We're not even anywhere near a big town. We're in a bad place to weather a very large hurricane. Because by then I just assumed that that's what was going to happen. I don't know why. I just assumed it. It just felt it. I saw it. It looked evil, like it wanted to eat things, like it wanted to eat people. It wanted to eat towns and forests and beaches and everything. It just wanted to eat. It was coming. So I managed to get them moving back towards the car. And of course, they wanted to be on the beach. And, my wife didn't really get it. And so I, I picked up the 7-year-old and she was surprised. And I said to my wife, there's a storm coming and we need to get out of here. We got to go. And I guess she finally noticed it. I don't know what's special about me that I noticed it before she did. Maybe it's the children. Maybe it's the happy memories. Maybe it's reliving your own childhood and just being in the past and really not in the moment and lacking situational awareness, which she's usually really good at. But when I picked up the 7-year-old and she looked at me and she looked past me and she looked up, I could see it in her face. She knew exactly what I meant. We got to go. And she said, yes, we got to go. And she picked up the 5-year-old and we dropped the shells on the ground and we headed towards the car. And like I said, it was a quarter mile of beach. We weren't really being careful. We weren't being safe. There was no boardwalk. There was no solid path. It was sand and weeds, and we just made the best time we could. And as we went down the beach, retracing our steps, the fishermen were disappearing, and the guy with the little bait trailer, he was folding up his umbrella and throwing the doors closed, and these people were headed out. And I thought, yeah, they get it. Everyone can see it. Something bad is coming. Something bad is happening. Worth getting off the beach. No fishing. Got to get out. And as we ran down the beach, the same waves that had just been gentle rollers, they started getting big. And the wind came up and it was in our face. And it became really hard to make any headway with the sand and the wind pushing and, the sand blowing into our faces. And pretty soon the wave tops began to split and the foam was coming off and there was spray coming in off the sea. The Gulf of Mexico was getting wild. And the waves darkened. The sky began to darken. And I swear, every minute we made our way down that beach, that wall of blackness got closer and closer, or bigger and bigger, or some combination of the two. And I just knew we got to get out of here. We are in trouble. We've got to get to the car. We got to get off of this beach. We have to get inland. We have to get far from here. And that's all I could think about. And we finally got to the car. But by the time we got to the car, we were like soaked with salt water. And sand was sticking to our legs from the sand blowing against us. And the girls were rubbing their eyes. They had sand in their eyes. And we got in the car and I turned the car around. I did a Y turn and I got in the parking lot and I started driving out of the parking lot. And there was on the frontage road, there was all these cars going back and forth. We didn't see anything like that coming in. There was no traffic to speak of. And everyone was very sedate and slow. And it was a slow beach and a slow day. And they were zipping around, all these cars zipping around. And we got to the end of the parking lot, and I said, okay, we're not the only ones hitting the road. Bring up the navigation app and let's see what the roads look like. So my wife brought up the app, we checked the roads, and the highway that we had just come in on, which was a fairly new state road, wide, and it was showing congestion. Reds and yellows, all the way up to the part we had to go to. It was already congested. And it was okay because my wife, local girl, she told me that back in the day, they didn't have the state road. That was a recent addition since she was a girl. There were local roads that they would take. They were named roads, and they went through all these little towns. And back in her day, it took 2 hours to get to the beach because there was all this traffic controls and stop signs and stop lights. And slow lanes and narrow roads. But at least we wouldn't be, I understood that we wouldn't be sitting in traffic bumper to bumper when something bad happened. And my concern was torrential rains, storm surge, everything you've ever heard about ever happening to anybody in Bangladesh, in the Maldives, Australia, Japan, the Philippines. You have these images that just get burned into your brain after so many of these events, and you kind of understand that people who can't get away from the beach and get inland are going to have a hard time. So I didn't care about being on a main road. So we got onto these little side roads, and the navigation app was really good. It was to give us all the turn by turns, and she knew the turns. These were all the roads that she was familiar with. It was going to take us right to where we needed to be. And so with some confidence that we were doing the right thing, we headed out. Before we got into the trees, I had one more chance to check the progress of the storm. And it was right on us. It was right on us. And I don't think it had anything to do with the forward motion of the storm. I don't think it did. It was growing. It was growing. It was becoming huge. It was becoming a monster. And, at the time I didn't know much about hurricanes, but, most hurricanes are a couple hundred miles across at most. And I just knew this was going to be enormous. I knew it was going to be huge, and that there was maybe no place to go. There was no outrunning it. There was nowhere to be. And wherever you're going to be in it. Unless you're in Texas, you're going to be in it. Where we were in it. And I got my wife and I got my two little girls, and we're in this car, and we're in the countryside in the panhandle of Florida. We don't know anything about it. We're going to this farmhouse, and it's we didn't even know what to do except just go. So I went as fast as I could. The winds were coming from the south. We were driving mostly northeast. And so that kind of helped a little bit, but I could feel the car jerking around in the gust of the wind. And when I could lean forward and look up from the windshield, I could see that where the trees came over the road, they were being whipped, not blowing, whipped, like this, whipped, sharp, like a belt, whip. And there were branches down on the side of the road, and smaller branches were scudding across the road in the wind. And then other branches would blow back the other way. And the car would drift right, and the car would drift left. And the trees were whipping back and forth and back and forth. And there were all these little stop signs, these little tiny little roads that crossed. I just drove through them, and I was going faster and faster all the time. I started out trying to obey the speed limits and trying to be reasonable and trying not to frighten my wife. But eventually, as I could just see everything around me was falling apart, I looked down at the speedometer. I didn't know how fast I was going. I was going 70 miles an hour. I wasn't even aware. It was just surreal. I was going 70 miles an hour down this little road, and I was running through stop signs and running through stoplights at these little towns. And everywhere I went, there was the signs of people. The lights were on in their houses, and all the doors were open on their car, and they were throwing the dog in the back and throwing whatever boxes and sheets and blankets into the cars. And they were all leaving. They were leaving. I don't know how far we were, maybe 10 miles inland, maybe 20 miles inland. And we were going through this little hamlet. It just looked like it was maybe 8 houses. And all these people were backing out of their driveways, and their cars are full of people and full of pets. And I had to slow down. and because I was afraid someone was going to shoot out in front of me, back out of the driveway in front of me. And I was pounding the steering wheel. Get out of the way. And at the same time, I was wanting them out of my way. I was hoping and praying that they could get gone. They could go. They could get out and hit the road and go fast. And we got through that group of houses, and I could see up ahead on the road, it's like a gray curtain. I thought, well, that's rain. That's rain. It's going to start raining now. And 100 thoughts went through my mind. There's going to be branches on the road, and it's going to be raining, and there's going to be leaves on the windshield, stuck to the windshield, and windshield wipers going, and can't move the leaves, and sticks and things flying into the car, and raining so hard, can't even see where you're going. And I was so wrapped up in just the scenario that we were driving into and trying to imagine all the threats and how far we had to go still, and what would we have to do to get there, and what were the obstacles along the way, that I didn't even realize that I was going so fast when I hit a wall of water. It was rain, but it was a wall of water. I don't know how else to describe it. It was a wall of water. And the car hit it. And you'd think that a car that size, going that fast, would just plow through rain, but it didn't. I thought the front windshield was going to burst in on us. The whole car shook. The doors rattled in their portals. They just rattled like this. Boom, 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 boom. And I hit that wall of water, and I just took my foot off the accelerator, and the car almost went sideways. It almost turned sideways in the road. And modern vehicles, they all have this, positive traction type of stuff going on. And I am sensible enough. I know how to steer a car in a slide, and I got it reoriented, and the wife is screaming and the girls are screaming, and I'm struggling with this car, and it's just a wall of water, and it's hydroplaning sideways. And it's a miracle it didn't go into a ditch. I have no idea how I kept it out of a ditch. It was a narrow road. And slides sideways, comes to a stop. And my heart is racing. My heart is beating. I was already in probably something of a panic attack. I was probably behaving like an idiot because of what was happening around us. But in any case, when I hit that wall of water, it brought me up short. And I just sat there in the middle of the road, my heart beating 1,000 beats a minute. And the girls are screaming, and the wife is screaming, and she starts yelling at the girls, and she climbs into the back seat to be with them. And finally I get the car straightened out, and I can't even see the road. I can barely see the hood of the car. I can't even see the road. I have to roll down the window. And that was a big mistake, because the winds are coming from both directions at the same time. And this huge, must have been a half a gallon of water came in through the window. Roll the window back up. I tried to open the door to see where the center of the road was, and I finally found the line. The white line is not even that well painted. It's almost invisible. I slammed the door against the wind, trying to pull it open, and we are able to go down the road, and I now know where the white line is. So I'm watching, just like out the side window. I kept it right there on the side window, and I'm steering, and I got the lights on, and the lights are doing no good, but I'm thinking, well, if someone else is coming, they'll see my headlights, and they won't front end me, right? And I'm watching this white line out the driver's window, and I'm driving and watching and looking up and driving. And I was going maybe 15 miles an hour at that point. And that felt reckless. That felt terrible. I mean, the car would sometimes shimmy and hydroplane, and the wind would catch it and move it around. And my wife is still yelling at me, "You're going too fast. You're going too fast." And I'm like, I'm going 10 miles an hour. We have to get out of here. We have to get out of here. We can't stay here. And you know, she understood. I mean, she understood. She was terrified. The girls were terrified. And everyone's screaming, and they're all screaming at me, and they're all screaming, "What's going on? What do we do?" And I don't know. Somehow we just kept going, and my wife was on the navigation app, and it was doing what it's supposed to do. And my fear was that whatever cell tower we were connected to, maybe there was one left, and that whatever was navigating us was going to fail completely. But it didn't. It kept us going, and she knew the ways, and she kind of knew the landscape, and we several times we missed our turn, had to back up and find the road, and the ditches were flooding, and you couldn't tell the difference between the ditch and the road. But we managed it. We managed it, and the road signs were shaking like this. The road signs twisting like that, shaking and twisting. You've never seen anything like it in your life. Shaking and twisting. I couldn't even tell if is the road we want going that way, or is it going this way. We had no idea, and it just like this. So we finally made it, and even the wind, the rain at least let up a little bit, just a tiny bit, so we could see. And we got back to our motel, this bed and breakfast converted into a motel. And I can't tell you how grateful I was. I don't know what I expected, but it just, the idea of just being in a house with a roof over your head, and not in a car, and not on the road, and not in the water, and not with the trees and the signs shaking like this, and just getting away from the violence. It was just so violent. It had been an hour and a half of just solid violence. And the girls crying themselves until they were hoarse, and my wife just trying to keep it together. And we pulled into the gravel driveway, and there was water running out. It was a fairly big gravel parking lot. And there's this, like a little river running out of the parking lot. And I had to make sure it was even the right place. It was hard to tell with all the rain, but I thought, what is this? This doesn't make any sense. So I pulled into the driveway, and I drove the short distance, and I got into the area that we were supposed to park in. And it was raining really hard, but I had a fair idea where our little suite was in this development. And I pulled in, and I backed in, and I told my wife and my daughters, "Look, you stay in the car. I'm going to have to, I'm going to go in. I'm going to open the door. I got the keys somewhere. I'm going to unlock the door. And when the door is open, then you can all come in, and you can all go in the room." And I left the car running. And I went, and I found the room. It was really dark. It was getting very dark, and the lights hadn't come on in the covering over the walkway. The lights hadn't come on, and we hadn't left the light on. It was really dark, and I had to really work hard to find the room. And I knew it was the room because the key fit. I couldn't remember the number. I was remembering it by position. The key fit, and the door opened. And as the door opened, all this water poured out of the room on my feet. This water poured out. And I just stood there looking at it. And there's 2-3 inches of water on the gravel parking lot. And there's another 3 inches of water in our suite. And I found the light, and the light actually came on. So it wasn't like there wasn't electricity. The light came on, and I looked in the room, and there was water pouring in from the ceiling, through the ceiling tiles. It was like garden hoses were put up in the ceiling. It was just running out here and running out there. And running in the bathroom, and there was all this water on the floor. And I realized that there was no way this was our room. We needed another room. We needed another accommodation. And I don't know what I was thinking, like the other rooms would be better or the other rooms would be available or anything. But I went to the office, which was, I guess, probably the original farmhouse. I went to the office and the light was on there. I could see it once I got close enough. I could see the light was on. And, I signaled to my wife, I did this, not good. And I maybe she understood, maybe she didn't, but the next thing I know, I'm knocking on the office, I'm going inside, I'm ringing the bell, and she comes rushing into the office behind me. And she said, "We've got to get out of here. We've got to go." I said, "We need another room. We can't go anywhere." She said, "No, we can't stay here. We need higher ground." And then I realized that whole countryside is crisscrossed with bayous and forested swamps and creeks. We passed 100 of them, little tiny bridges that are like 40 feet long, and you brush all around. You can't even see the water, but you pass one every quarter of a mile. And she says, "We got to get out of here. We got to get to higher ground. This is all going to be underwater." But this is Florida. It's flat. I didn't know the terrain. I couldn't think of a place. And I asked her and she couldn't either. She just said, "We've got to get to higher ground." So I gave up on the room. I gave up on that whole thing. Ran back to our room and, light was still working, grabbed our suitcases and went back out to the car, threw them in the back. Rain is pouring in, threw everything in the back, and go to jump in the front seat. And where's my wife? Where's my wife? I'm looking around. Where's my wife? She knows we have to go, and I'm starting to lose my cool. I don't know what to do. I want a room. I want some place where we'll be safe. We can't be safe in a car. This is not going to work. And now we have to get to high ground. And what does that even mean on the Florida Panhandle? What are you even talking about? We're surrounded by waterways. What does high ground even look like? And she finally shows up and she's got the food that we bought. It's still in the bags. And she comes back with the food. And she says, "We're going to need this." And I realize now what she's thinking, that we're in for it. This is going to be a multi-day event. And then she says, "Come with me. We'll get the bedding." And I wasn't sure what she was talking about, but she's making sense so far. So we go back to the room and I'm right behind her and she goes in there and she's stripping the beds. She's taking the sheets and the blankets and the pillows. And then she says, "Go into the closet. There's extra sheets and pillows. And if you can, grab the towels." And we just grab everything we can. And we go back and I go back to get the towels. And I even strip off the shower curtain because it will keep you dry in a pinch. And now we're thinking, our brains are working. We're engineers. We know how to problem solve. We know what problems look like. We can anticipate problems. We know what solutions sound like and look like and taste like and feel like. And we're solutionizing this thing. And so we're throwing all this crap in the back. Wife gets in the back, she grabs the girls, puts them in the back of the car, lays down the back seats to make a bigger area. And she says, "You got to go into Cottonvale. It's a bigger city, and maybe we can find some place to lay up." And Cottonvale was about, 10 miles north. So we get on the road, and it's another nightmare. It's terrible. It's the worst. And we get into, and there's all these cars. All these cars. Some of them are behind us. People are honking their horns. I pull over. They go around. I saw cars in the ditches. People driving fast. There was collisions. because you couldn't see and everyone's driving fast. And I'm terrified that we're going to get whacked, that we're going in this great big car and someone's not going to see us and they're going to be out of their mind. And why not? I mean, I was out of my mind, and they're going to run into us, and we're going to be trapped on the road in a gully, next to a creek. And who knows what the creeks are going to do? But we got lucky. And we got on a good piece of road. There wasn't a lot of cars. My wife is on the phone to her sister, and she's saying, you got to get out of there. You need to leave. And they were, and I could tell from her end of the conversation that they were wanting us to come to the house. They were talking about dinner. And she's like, no, we can't come. We have to get to a safe place. Our room is destroyed. And they were like, come here, we'll put you up. And she was saying, I could hear her end of it. No, we can't stay there. And you can't stay there either. And she's shouting and she's crying. And the girls are crying. And they're crying for their grandma and grandpa. And it's just this weird, stupid, deranged conversation. And in the middle of the call ended. And that was it. That was our cell phone tower. Whatever it was that got us as far as we had gotten. That was it. It was done. The cell phone tower was done. And my wife she just broke down. She sobbed. I've never seen her cry like that. No, I have seen her do that since. She's cried like that since. I couldn't do a thing for her. I was driving and I couldn't do a thing for her. There's nothing I could do. Just keep going. Hold on a minute. No, I'm okay. I think I'm okay. I'm okay. So we got to this town, and it had a little downtown, and every intersection was packed with cars, and there was gridlock and people shouting. You couldn't hear them over the wind and the howl and the rain. But you could see them gesturing and fist fights and just people that have just completely lost their composure. And we were sitting in traffic. And right up ahead, I could see a ramp. And it was a parking structure. It was one of those concrete parking structures. And probably they were redeveloping their little downtown and trying to do the best. And they made some elevated parking. Gray concrete structure with landscaping around it. And it was clearly a downstairs. And then there was an upper level, like a middle level. And then there was a top, which probably had parking too. So I figured, well, that's it. You want high ground. That's probably it. And nobody was pulling in there because nobody wanted to park. I mean, who the hell would want to park in something like this? They were all trying to get out of town. And that wasn't happening either. The intersection that we were at was just a scrapyard. The intersection was a scrapyard. None of those vehicles were going anywhere. Maybe even ever again. So I had to get around the cars in front of me, and there was a sidewalk, and the sidewalk was fairly wide, and there was nobody on it. And I just got out of traffic, went on the sidewalk about 50 feet, and I turned into this parking structure. And if anything, the wind was worse in the parking structure because, it's like a wind tunnel. There's a wind tunnel effect. And I thought, oh God, this is a bad idea. This is a bad idea. We're going to get rolled. It's going to be bad. But, what could I do? I couldn't go back. the intersection was a wrecking yard, and I'm in this building, and it does have the advantage of having some elevation. So I drove around, and there were cars in the bottom, parked in the bottom, and there was a ramp, and the ramp went up to the next level, and I took the ramp up. And as soon as I got to the next level, the wind hit us, and it was exactly what I feared. Whatever it was on the ground level, amongst the buildings and the trees and the other cars, it was twice that on the second level. And I didn't know what to do. There was no place to hide. There was no shelter. But there was an enclosed stairwell, so that when you got to the second level, there was a little elevator, really, really tiny, and then to the side of it, there was a stairwell. So you had your choice of taking this tiny, slow elevator or taking the stairs. But between the enclosure, the concrete enclosure made for the elevator and the width of two sets of stairs, and the stairs were like 5 feet wide, there was a good space what one could shelter up against. So I discovered that, and given the direction of the wind, it was whipping left and right and fore and aft, it felt like that would be some protection. And there was a pickup truck parked there, as if someone had driven to the second floor and then parked and then taken the stairs down. And so I maneuvered the SUV, and I got within like 2 feet of those stairs. Someone might come up, right? Or someone might need to go down. So I didn't want to get too close. I got within 2 feet, enough to even open the door if I needed to. And I parked right there, and I got right up against that pickup truck. And I thought, well, this is bad. This is a bad place. But we've got some height. And if the creeks come up, this was my reasoning. If the creeks come up, we're out of the water. And if the wind doesn't get any worse, we're probably okay. We've got this 3-ton vehicle, and we're sandwiched between 2 layers of concrete. And there was a retaining wall around the entire thing of concrete. And it was about 4 feet high, I guess. And it was topped with a welded metal railing. And it meant to keep people from driving off the end of the parking structure, and also to keep people from inadvertently or deliberately pitching themselves out. So it was open, but it was somewhat protected, if you follow my meaning. So I thought, well, we won't have to worry about branches and things coming in here. We should become somewhat safe. So I decided to tough it out. And there was another ramp that went up again, and it went up to the top. But for what I thought was the top, probably the 3rd level, right? But I knew that to go up there would be suicide. That would be suicide. We couldn't do that. So we were going to tough it out on the 2nd level, and that was my only thought. That's all I could think about, was toughening it out on the 2nd level. I had no idea what we were in for. How could anybody have any idea? But getting into that parking structure and getting off the roads, without doubt, saved us. There's no way we would have survived it. No way we would have survived it. So I left the car running. It was fogging up inside. I turned on the defrosters so I could see. I left the headlights on so I could see. And it wasn't like there was anything to see. I just didn't want to be in the dark. We turned on the dome light so the girls could have some light. Their mother was with them, and sometimes she would break out into sobs. I know that she was thinking about her family. I knew it at the time. But there was nothing we could do. There's nothing we could do. Except hope that they got out, that they heard warning in her voice, and they actually did something for themselves. But there was just this thought in my mind that they didn't, and I couldn't understand it. The weather people were like that. And, this is the Gulf of Mexico. Hurricanes spin up out of nowhere and crash ashore and destroy huge swaths of the Gulf. And they were so glib and just pasted on smiles and go to the beach and go to the boardwalk. And then I heard that guy selling bait, and he was like, "Oh yeah, we're rebuilding everything here. All the neighbors have come back." And it was like deranged. It was just deranged on the face of it. And then her family like, "Come to dinner. What, your room isn't suitable? We have a spare room here. You can get another room tomorrow." And it was deranged. It was unhinged. It was unhinged. I don't know how else to say. I mean, you don't want to think badly of people. You don't want to speak ill of the dead, but it was unhinged. There was no reality in any of these people's lives. So frustrating. And I'll tell you right now, it's not just Florida. I've seen it in Houston. I've seen it in Galveston, Corpus Christi. The people who should know better, with personal experience of this shit, not doing the right thing. What is it? It's some sort of psychopathy. It's what is it? It's coping. It's denial. It's hoping for everything to just be okay. I'm a forensic engineer. I go into courtrooms and the people who are representing the defense or the people who are being sued, they say things like that. They say, "Well, we thought it would be fine. We thought we knew we thought we understood what we were supposed to build." And it's the same thing. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, your building fucking collapsed and it killed 178 people. Your bridge collapsed and it killed 63 people. And all they can say is, "We didn't know. We did our best. We thought it was fine." And there's just so much of this goes on. What is wrong with people? I'm sorry, that was a rant. I guess you didn't want to hear all that, but that's... Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, there's a story there. There's a story there. I know you're here for this story. Everyone wants this story, but that's also a story. The storm got worse. It was several times the car, the SUV, was gripped so hard in some kind of wind that it tilted up on its left side before it crashed back down again. And I don't know, 3 times it did that. And countless times the wind blowing through created so much negative pressure that it pulled the doors out, pulled them out away from the vehicle body and slammed them back, pulled them and slammed them back. Bang! So violent. And then at other times, the wind would come and it hit the vehicle side so hard that rainwater would spurt in through the gaskets, just blow into the car, this spray of water, just burst of water. And there was water collecting in the footwells of the passenger side and the driver's side and probably the other parts too. But we'd put down the back seat, and the girls were staying dry. My wife was dry in the back, but the doors were just letting water in, and the vents in the front of the car, the water was pouring in. And I left the car running, and I was afraid. I remember being afraid to turn it off. We had a lot of gas. I filled up on the way to the beach, not knowing when I'd have another opportunity. Filled up the car, and it was still 3/4 full. And I wouldn't turn it off. I wouldn't turn it off because I felt like I was in a Hollywood horror movie, like some kind of Michael Crichton or Steven Spielberg thing. And I just had this thought that if I turned the car off, it wouldn't restart. Because that's what happens in the movie, right? That's what happens in the movie. You know, you got your car and you're safe in your car, and then what is it? Zombies or bees or birds or whatever it is, forest fire, and you turn off the engine, and everyone in the theater goes, "Don't turn off the engine." And sure enough, 3 minutes later in the plot, when you got to start the motor again and speed away into some version of safety, it won't start. Grind, 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 grind. And people in the audience are going, "You turned it off. Why'd you turn it off? You should have left it running." And I was just having this nightmare scenario that we're in a movie, and it's like, there'll be zombies, and there'll be, demons and all this crazy shit, because it's just all this violence. And I didn't turn it off because I didn't want to be that stupid fuck. I didn't want to be that idiot who turns off the car. After about 3 hours or 4 hours, I don't even know. I didn't even look at my watch. I didn't even think to look at it. I think I started seeing things. I started seeing people in the headlights, and then there was no people. And I thought I saw like a refrigerator sliding across the concrete, and a car. I thought I saw a car drive by and just barely clip the lights and then just disappear into the rain. And it went on, and it went on, and it went on. And after about 8 hours, I could see in the headlights objects floating like this, bobbing up and down and swirling around, bobbing up and down. And I thought, I didn't know what to think. I don't even know what I thought at first. I just stared at it. I mean, I'd seen so many things, and then there's these objects. I'm on the second floor of a concrete parking structure, and there's objects floating in the headlights. It's like being at the beach, and there's driftwood or something floating in the water. And I realized the second floor of the parking structure was under water. The water had come in, and it brought floating things in with it. They came up the ramp just like I did. They came up the ramp from the ground level. Floating things coming up the ramp. And I saw it just, I realized suddenly what I was looking at. It was a body. It was a human body. It's not even clothed. All the clothing stripped off and didn't even look human anymore. Lacerated, and my God, just thinking about it makes me sick. It was bobbing around, and then it got swept away, and then there was another one, and it was different because it had clothing on, and that bobbed around in front of the car, and it was swept away, and thank God the girls were asleep, and my wife was in the back, and I don't know if she was sleeping or not. I couldn't sleep, but at least she was in the back, and she wasn't seeing what I was seeing. I'm so glad they never saw it. Bodies floating in the water in the second level of a parking structure. What in the name of God was happening? I had no idea. But I found out later. Man, did we find out later. We were in that storm, in that rain, in that nightmare. 18 hours, 20 hours. Completely lost track of time. My back was sore. My shoulders were sore. I was so tense for so long. I guess I fell asleep at some point. I fell asleep because next thing I knew, my wife was shaking me awake. And she says, "It's over. It's over." And I said the stupidest thing. I said the dumbest thing. I said the dumbest thing. I said, "What's over?" It was the dumbest thing I've ever said. But it just came out. I had, what was it? Trauma? PTSD? A derangement? Did I lose my mind for a moment? I had no idea what she was talking about. What's over? I was in the car and I had this sense maybe we were at the beach and I fell asleep. And that was like the last coherent memory I had was being at the beach. We were at the beach. And I fallen asleep. I was tired. We'd traveled. It was long days and visiting, and I'd fallen asleep at the beach. And that was the last coherent thought I guess I'd had. And the rest of it was just, what was it? Panic, derangement, hysteria. She says the storm is over. And I looked around, and there was light coming through from the sides of the parking structure where the concrete didn't meet the ceiling. And it wasn't blue sky, it was gray. It was gray, but it was light. It was light. It was morning. What morning? I didn't even know. Was it the next day? Was it the day after? I had no idea. I just knew that we'd survived it. We'd survived something. We'd survived something that I was at a complete loss to comprehend. I couldn't comprehend it. And I asked her, because the insides were all fogged up. I asked her, check to see if there's water. And she gave me this look like, water? What are you talking about? I said, there was water here. There was water up to the grill. There was water here. Look out there and see if you can see any water. I tried to wipe my window and I couldn't see anything because we were too close to the stairs. And the stairs were full of debris, wood and branches and appliances and things I couldn't even describe. They're so mangled and destroyed. I couldn't see anything. And so she went to open the door and I said, "Don't open the door. The water will come in." And then I think she finally understood what I was talking about. And she finally found a towel and cleaned off the inside of the window. And there was a foot of water on the second floor. A foot of water. And I felt like I could open the door. So I didn't think I could get out on the passenger side because there was so much debris wedged in between the car and the stairwell. And so I slid across the seat and I went to the passenger side door and I opened it up and the water was right there. The water was right there at the door sill. But it was low enough that I could get out. And so I opened the door and she said, "Don't go out there." I said, I have to see. And she says, "It's not safe. Don't go out there." And I could see in her eyes that she was terrified. I said, "The wind isn't blowing so much. I think it's okay." She said, "The wind will come back." I said, "If the wind comes back, I'll come back. I'm not going far." We had an argument about it, but I had to see. I had to know what had happened and if it was done happening. The openings around the second floor structure where the concrete ended and the welded pipe and then a little bit, it was piled high with debris, timbers and roofing and huge limbs from trees. Limbs were a foot and a half across, piled up against this thing all the way around, as if some bulldozer just bulldozed up a bunch of debris and just piled it up on the sides of this structure. It wasn't very big. It was a small parking place. It was just a small town that had their own little parking structure. It was little. And so she was yelling at me. She was saying, don't go out there. Don't go any further. Get back in. So I did. Somehow, sometime during the night, I had cut off the motor. I don't remember doing it. I guess I don't know, maybe I woke up at some point and just instinctively turned it off. The car started. And I can't tell you how relieved I was. We still had a half a tank of gas. And I was never so relieved of anything in my life happening than that right there, that car started. So I drove straight ahead up the next ramp, and I got out of the water and onto the roof of the parking structure, the top. And it was strewn with lumber, just laying flat on the ground, strewn with lumber. And I could see the nails sticking up. And you don't want to drive over lumber. You'll get nails in your tires. Not that this vehicle was going anywhere. We were in a hellscape. I knew it. I knew everything was destroyed. I could tell from all the debris and piled into the stupid stairwell, even there. So we got up there and I parked on the ramp, which was still clear, parked on the ramp, and I got out and I walked up there and I stood on the top of that thing, and it was this gray sky. The wind was blowing. It was maybe a 40-mile-an-hour wind. The wind was blowing, and there was still spray of rain coming across. And I went to the edge of the parking structure, and throwing lumber out of the way so I wouldn't step on any nails, just throwing it out of the way and make a path. And I went there, and I looked over the edge. And I wish I could describe this. And I've tried to describe it to other people. And when I was debriefed by the government, I tried to describe my feelings. They didn't really care. They knew what they were dealing with, but they wanted to know my feelings, how I felt about it. Like counseling? I don't know what they were doing. Assessing my mental framework? I have no idea what they were asking me these questions for. And I couldn't describe it to them, and I can't describe it now. The closest that I can come is it was a hellscape. It was a hellscape. It didn't look like any place on earth. It didn't look like the kind of place that you could find on earth, except here, because of what had just happened. There were no buildings, except the one I was standing on, which was made out of concrete. There were no buildings anywhere. As far as the eye could see, we were on the outer edges of this decently sized town, and there were no buildings. And it wasn't because they were in the trees. There were no trees. There was nothing. And where there were no trees, there were also no buildings. There was nothing. And there were no foundations. There was nothing. There was dirt, silt. There was silt that looked like what a river would wash in. Silt like what accumulates in a parking lot near the beach when the wind has been blowing, the sand blows across the landscape, accumulates in the parking lot. It was like that. It was silt everywhere. And not a single tree standing higher than 3 feet above the ground. Huge trees. I don't even know what species. What are they? Oaks? Cypress? Broken off, splintered. Just nothing but splinters coming out of them. And the splinters were splintered. I mean, it was just so much destruction. As far as the eye could see, which wasn't that far because the wind was blowing. There was still bands of rain coming down. But as far as the eye could see, Every single thing was flat. It was flat. You've never been in a place that was as flat as that. The stumps of the trees were sticking out of silt. Silt was pounded around them. Branches of trees that could have come from anywhere were buried in silt. And off to the north, as well as I could figure north, there was a pile of, what is it? Flotsam, jetsam? It's like the stuff you find high up on the beach, right? Where the waves bring in the stuff that's in the water and pushes it up the beach, and leaves a big pile, right? It's like that. Except it was like 100 feet tall. This like mountain of debris, trees and parts of trees and cars and things that I couldn't even recognize were twisted like they'd gone through a can crusher, and nothing intact. There was no intact roofs. There was no intact walls. There was nothing recognizable, nothing that you could recognize except lumber, shredded insulation, particle board, shredded plywood, just nothing recognizable. Not two boards nailed together, not even two boards left nailed together. Everything blasted, just blasted. The trees blasted to the ground, the houses blasted, no buildings, not two 2x4s nailed together, nothing, everything blasted. I couldn't believe it. And I just stood and I stared. And they asked me, what did it feel like? And I felt like I wasn't even on Earth. What had happened to my planet? Where did it go? Where did the planet go? Where did it go? It's gone. Where did it go? And I've never found a better way to express my complete horror than to recognize that the planet I thought I knew was gone for as far as I could see. As far as I could see. So before long, my wife is standing at my side and she's wrapped herself around my arm and she's squeezing me so tight that it hurts. And I know what she's thinking. I know what she's thinking without asking her. Somewhere out there in that hellscape is her family. Her family. They're out there. And the horse and the cow and the pig and the swing set and the memorabilia and the photo albums and the rag doll and all of it, the chickens, all of it, it's out there somewhere. Just like it went through a blender. And we just stood there and we didn't say anything. And I finally said, I don't want the girls to see this. I don't want the girls to ever see this. And I in a moment of absolute clarity, she said, they're going to have to see this. And we have a lot of explaining to do. There's really not much else to say. The whole world knows what happened to us. We got plucked off of that rooftop by the Coast Guard helicopter. I can't even tell you right now. It was just like a dream. And we were so sick and we were so tired and exhausted by the time they came. I barely remember what happened. We had a lot of time. We had time to clear the top of the parking structure, and we drove the car up finally and parked it up there. The thinking was that if rescuers came, they would see this building, the only building left. And how many counties? I don't know, 8 counties, 10, 12, 15 counties. The only building left, as far as we knew. And they would see the car on top, and maybe they would register that there was people there. And then I got the idea that we could take some of this lumber that we've been pushing off to the side and spell a word, just like SOS or help or something. And so we decided on the latter, help. And we decided to make it really big, because who knows when they would come and how far away they would be. And we used all this lumber, and it is 2x4s, right? 2x6s, and it's white and highly visible. And we made this word. We parked right next to it, and thought we would tough it out. Well, what else could we do? I was worried that the girls would want to go down and explore and just get off the roof. I mean, it was still raining. It was windy. It was and the visuals were horrific of what we were seeing. And so I went down and I dragged the bodies off of the second floor, and I tried to drag them down the ramp, but the ramp was completely choked with debris. So I had to find a place where I could just pitch them over the edge into the debris that was piled up against the side of the structure. And I pulled 5 bodies out and disposed of them. And they were completely unrecognizable as humans. I mean, you could tell they were human bodies, but I don't know. I don't want to talk about it. My God. I think you'd have to be a soldier who's been on a war zone to really comprehend what that was like. And we had a reasonable expectation that in a few days, or maybe less, maybe 24 hours, rescuers would come and they would see us there, and we would flag them down and they'd rescue us. But they didn't come. And after the second day, I told my wife we had to be careful with the water and the food. We didn't have much water. We just had what we picked up on the way to the beach and on the way from out of the airport. And we had some healthy food. We had bananas and apples and healthy snacks, and there was a lot of energy in that. And there was even a certain amount of water in the fresh fruit. But we just had to. I just didn't know. But I kind of knew. I did know. I knew. And I didn't want to tell her about it. What I just knew was true. That this storm that we were probably not even in the middle of, it must have been enormous. 1,000 miles across? Was the wind field 1,000 miles across? Were we in the middle of a blasted hellscape that was 1,000 miles across? And we're not even in an important town. We weren't in Tallahassee or any place that you could even name. We were in this podunk little town in all these rural counties, just nothing but fields and orchards. And when would they even come? And with the destruction I was seeing, would they bother? Because it's clear no one survived that. And the most eerie thing about it was that there was no sound. There were no natural sounds. If you were talking and then you stopped, the silence was like a wall. It just hit you suddenly. There was no sound. There were no birds. There were no insects. You could look, and there was no signs of animals moving or people or anything. It was just silent and dead. And I knew in my pit of my gut that everything that should be there was dead. Everything was killed except us, me and my family. We were the only living things for what, 100 miles in all directions, 200 miles, 300 miles. Was the entire north of Florida annihilated? Or Alabama? Or maybe even Georgia? And what about Mississippi? Was it 1,000 miles in all directions? And here we were, 4 people stuck in this hellscape that looked like death. And why would anyone fly out in the middle of that looking for anyone alive? I knew in the pit of my stomach they weren't coming. They weren't coming. They had no reason to come. Everything was dead. No one could survive that. No one did survive that. Everyone was dead. Everyone was dead. I knew everything was dead. Everywhere. Maybe a snake, maybe a rat. Everything else was dead. On the 3rd day, we started seriously rationing our food and especially our water. I went down and I went out into the wreckage, walking, trying to avoid the nails. And luckily, I found like a bottle of water, just one of those little bottles of water. I found one of those, and that was it. That's all I found. And I was happy to have it because, water, you die first of dehydration. And it was hot and it was muggy and it stank. And the winds just kept blowing. It was just so violent. And there was always like this 40-mile-an-hour wind that you just couldn't get away from. 5 days and 6 days, 7 days. And the girls, they whined for a while and then they just got very quiet. They got so quiet. And I was so afraid. And I didn't know what to do. Should I try to keep them awake? Should I try to keep them talking or clinging to something? Or should I just let them go? Just let them sleep. Let them fall asleep. Let them sleep through what was clearly the end of our world. Let them sleep through it. It would be a mercy. Just let them sleep through it. And on the 8th day, they found us. It was a Coast Guard helicopter or something. Like I say, I don't remember. And they were just flying over, surveying or something. And they saw our help that we spelled out with lumber. And they saw the car. And we didn't even hear them. But when we finally heard them, they were like right overhead. And we grabbed our towels and we were waving them over our head and shouting. And it was too soon to be hopeful. But they saw us. They saw us. They knew we were there and they knew we were alive. They didn't stay. They flew on, but they came down low enough to shout at us and say they would come back. They would bring another vehicle, and they flew off. And true to their word, 2 hours later, it was a big chopper came in. It's military, big green military chopper, and they sent some people down on ropes and they checked on us to see if we were okay. And we were crying. My wife was crying. I was crying. We said help our daughters. And they had some water and they gave woke the girls up. We gave them water, and that helped a lot. And they were delirious. They couldn't even focus their eyes. They were just so pitifully just wasted from the heat and the wind and the violence and the no food and no water. But they got them into stretchers, and they pulled them up into the helicopter. And then they came back and they got us, and we pulled us up into the helicopter. And we got out of there. And it was like a 2-hour flight. And I could see the landscape, and they told me, don't look down. They told me, don't look down. I said, I got to look down. I got to know. And I could look out their stupid window, and I could see mile after mile after mile of the same thing. Just this hellscape. Drifts of houses and trees piled up as if flood had come through there. And finally, we got over something that wasn't as destroyed. And then finally, we got over something where there were police barricades where no one could go further. And finally, we got over something that looked like a town. And they put us down on an airport runway. And we were saved. 8 days. 8 days it took. And as we were crossing the tarmac to get to like a temporary medical center or something, they were going to hook us up to IVs. I don't know what they were going to do, what they had planned. I asked the guy in uniform, how many others have you saved? Have you rescued? And he just shook his head. He just shook his head like this. He shook his head. And I was so worried about our daughters that I had no idea what was going on. They had them on gurneys. They hooked them up to IVs. They put, heart EKGs on them. I mean, they were so close to gone. And they gave them what they needed, and they pulled through. And my wife and I both had a thorough checkup, and we both got IVs for dehydration. And there was just a stream of doctors who came through, and a stream of I don't know what, politicians. I don't even know who these people were. And they were talking to us. They were asking us questions, and they asked if was there anyone else? Should we go back? And I said, there's nobody. There's nobody, man. There's nobody. There's nobody there. There can't be anybody there. We're it. You got us. We're done. You're done. They shuttled us between hospitals for 2 days. We lost track of our little girls for a little while, and I blew a gasket. It's like, where are my daughters? You're not taking my daughters anywhere. Where are my daughters? They were in some pediatric ward, getting exactly the care they needed, of course, from exactly the people who specialize in this kind of shit. But I was just, my mind, I still sometimes have panic attacks. We'll be out as a family, and I'll turn my back, and I'll get focused on something, and it'll just hit me. Where are my girls? And I'll look around. Where are my girls? And they'll be right there. They'll be right there. They were right there all along. But it was just this out of sight, just and out of mind. It just triggers this reaction of, where are my daughters? Where are my girls? And they've gotten used to it. I mean, it's happened so many times that they've gotten used to it. They say, Daddy, we're right here. Daddy, it's okay. We're safe. We're safe. Some days later, I got a visit from the Department of Homeland Security. And they didn't have much to say, but they wanted a commitment from me and my wife that we would not discuss our situation with the media or with any other departments of the federal, state, local governments. They had a lot of questions for us, and if we would tolerate that, then they would be grateful. And would you please sign this NDA? And I know what an NDA is. I'm a forensic engineer. I have to sign NDAs for everything. I have to sign an NDA before I can approach most sites of disasters. I have to sign an NDA before I'm allowed to testify in court. I have to sign an NDA, after the fact and after the awards and after everything else. And I've signed non-disclosure agreements for the most petty bullshit. And they wanted me to sign an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, not to communicate with the media or any other departments of the federal government of the United States of America. Any departments of the federal government of the United States of America, that I would not communicate anything about our ordeal from the time we landed in Tallahassee International until that very morning when I was about to sign that NDA. And I couldn't even discuss that I was under an NDA. I just couldn't discuss it. I couldn't discuss anything. And I couldn't tell why they didn't even explain it to me. What was I signing away? And for how long? When can I talk to anybody? When can I explain why I was gone for 8 days? When can I explain what happened to my family? And they said 2 years. You can't talk to anybody about any fucking thing. No department outside the Department of Homeland Security for 2 years. And in exchange, we would be taken care of. Whatever we needed. Counseling, hospitalization. If we need to be relocated, money, if I couldn't work anymore, if I was too shattered to even hold down a career, anything we needed, they would take care of it. If I didn't say a word for 2 years. And I signed it, and my wife signed it. And we were so shattered at that point, and we needed so much help. And our girls were so hurt, and we were so hurt. And we were just so damaged. We signed it. And it turned out to be okay. We got a lot of counseling. My wife got a lot of counseling. God bless her. And the children, they're resilient. They outgrow things. But they still have nightmares. 2 years later, they still have nightmares. If the wind is blowing, if there's rain hitting the window, just a storm, just any storm, rain is hitting the window. If we're in a car, we're driving, and we're in our neighborhood, we're in our town, and the rain is coming down, and I turn the windshield wipers on. I couldn't go back to work for a while. They paid our bills, true to their promise. They paid our bills, and after 6 months, I was able to go back into the office. And I like to think I made a full recovery, but maybe you've noticed in this retelling, first time I've had to talk to anybody in 2 years, it's still hard. It's hard. It's hard. I don't even know. I can't answer that question. I don't know what the hardest part was. They each have their own unique moment of paralyzing terror. And I remember the moment. I do remember the moment when I knew we were in trouble. I knew it was big trouble. I could not have imagined the kind of trouble it would be, but I knew it would be big. I knew that. And the moment when I knew that was we are on the beach in Mexico Beach, surrounded by the remains of houses, lives, and community, businesses, wreckage, empty foundations. And I looked up. I put my hand up to measure that storm by my fingers. And it had grown. And I knew. I just knew. It only got worse, of course. But I think that that's the kind of moment you remember, like a turning point, right? When you realize that you stepped into something, that you are not, that the place you are in is not what you think it is. And what's about to happen to you is not what you thought could happen. And everything about your world is like you've just rotated into a parallel universe. You're not in Kansas anymore. And it wasn't the scariest moment, but it's the one I keep coming back to. And I'm there right now. I'm there right now. For some reason, I keep coming back to that. We're not in Kansas anymore. Toto, we're not in Kansas anymore. The rest you know, of course. The pictures of us being rescued off the roof were all over the world, all over the internet. The press releases my wife and I had to stand through. She stood through one, and after that, she couldn't do it anymore. I did the rest of them with my heart in my throat most of the time. And, they told me every word to say, everything the questions I could answer, what I should say to each question. And it was like being a trick pony. It's like they trotted me out, and they would have trotted out my whole family. I know they would have. And it was a long time later, months later, that I realized we were all they had. We were all they had. They didn't have anything else to trot out for a press release, for some happy ending, for some happy story where everyone could cry happy tears about the rescue and all the rescues and all the people pulled off of all the tops of all the buildings. Because there were no people pulled off the tops of buildings. We were what they had. Can you just imagine that? That's all they had. Everything else was outside the blast radius. Everything inside was gone. Two years it's been. Yes, when you contacted me and you wanted to know if I was willing to talk about the event, I was still under NDA. But man, I was so happy. And when we finally nailed this date, I was going to be here. I am here. I am still here. I am not in that meat grinder. We got out and I am here. You hear me? You hear what I'm saying? I'm here. I'm here. I'm still here. Still standing. Still breathing. And I came here to say that. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm sorry, could you repeat the question? Yeah. Yeah, there are some things I'd like to say. I know that the whole drama is this family of four being pulled off of this structure, parking structure in the middle of a blasted hellscape. And that's probably why we're having this conversation, because, that's what got out. That's what went around the world. That's what was all over the newspapers and all over the nightly news. And, that's what interrupted the football game. Just in, people rescued. But there's some other things I want to say. Do with this what you will. I know you come here for the drama, but do with this what you will. Number one, people to this day, I am certain, don't understand what happened. They don't understand. I've seen, I've watched probably every documentary that ever came out about this event. And every single one of them completely missed the mark about what happened. It's like the usual argument. There's an elephant in the room and everyone's walking around it, right? There's a gorilla in the room and everyone's walking around it. No one's talking about the gorilla. And the second thing is the mindset of the people who I was interacting with in the run-up to this destructive event. I'm going to talk about the latter first, because it kind of plays in the other thing about the nature of this event. So I've already alluded to my confusion about how people were behaving as this thing rolled in. The meteorologists, who should have known better, just from experience, should have known better, and didn't say the thing. I don't know if they were just promoting, the Chamber of Commerce and business and travel and what they were doing. They didn't say the right thing. And people didn't get out of the way. There were practically no warnings. We got one evacuation warning on our phones. I missed it completely. My wife caught it, and she told me about it much later, that there was an evacuation warning, an evacuation warning. Did you know that's like only 2 steps into a 3-step process? The last step is evacuation order. We never got an evacuation order. We were in the area. We were even on the beach. We were in the counties that were affected by this. We only got an evacuation warning that I never even knew about, because I was driving like crazy, and she told me about it later. And that guy on the beach selling bait in this couldn't even admit that terrible things had happened. And her own family in the most vulnerable place imaginable, pretending that nothing bad could happen. And her telling them, you've got to get out. And they couldn't get out. They couldn't hear it. They couldn't understand. They wouldn't understand. They didn't understand. And they made probably no effort of any kind to get out. And I've been noticing this a lot. I've been seeing this in people who survive these disasters. And generally, if they're alive, they're saying, well, I wish I'd gotten out when they told us it was time to get out. But they don't. And this is a story. I've already mentioned that. There's a story there. If you want to do another story that's not all about the drama of 4 people being yoinked off of the top of a parking structure in the middle of a hellscape, if you want to do another story, you're the journalists. You tell me how this works. Go back there. Find people, ask them, how do you feel about this? Do you have any feelings? There's something wrong with these people. And it's the same thing in Texas, and it's the same thing in Louisiana. There's something wrong with these people. Terrible things are happening. Terrible things have happened. People have died in these terrible events, and people are taking it seriously. What is wrong with these people? What kind of madness is this? It must be some kind of collective delusion that they can't save themselves from, a delusion that they can't break out of. There's a story there. There's journalism there. I can't help you. I can't help you with that. I'm too frightened. I'm too scared. I'm too frustrated. I can't go back into that mindset of wondering what's wrong with people and losing people who couldn't even imagine saving themselves. And the second thing, probably related to that, is that this event has gone, I would say, completely unreported, which is phenomenal. I've thought a lot about it, and I think I understand why it has basically fallen under the radar. This was a Category 5 storm. It blew mostly through rural areas, rural Alabama, rural Florida. I found out later that the debris field was 800 miles wide, twice the size of most hurricanes. The debris field alone was 800 miles wide. The winds were so horrific that no one actually knows how high the winds were. And that seems impossible. We've got weather stations, we've got airports, we've got, hurricane hunter aircraft whose job it is to fly into hurricanes and measure the winds and measure the eye and drop the equipment into the eye and see what's happening. But none of that worked. Almost nobody knows this, but none of that worked. I finally caught up with I'm not going to name the guy, and I'm not going to name the field he's working in. He asked me not to, so I'm not going to. I caught up with this guy, a friend of a friend in my field. And I told him that I was under an NDA, but that I had questions. I can't answer any questions, but I have questions. And would he talk to me about what happened on Labor Day a year before? And he said he would. He was a little reluctant, and I understood why. And I told him, yeah, well, I've got a story, pal, and you want to hear it. And I got some questions, and I need some answers. So we met. I flew out to where he was a professor at a university. And we had dinner. We talked a little bit. And I asked him some questions. I said, look, what do they know about that hurricane? Because that's what it was. And he said, we don't know very much at all about that hurricane. And the story is that the wind field was so huge, and the winds themselves were so off the charts, that every instrument they might have used to measure the wind was destroyed almost at once. When the edges of the wind field showed up, it destroyed everything. And after that, there were no instruments. There were no people on the ground. Everything was chaos. Everything, all the power failed. All the equipment failed. The Hurricane Center flew 2 P-3 Orion aircraft, Hurricane Hunter aircraft, into that vortex and lost them both. They didn't even get to the middle. They just got through the edges when they were both lost. Coming in from different sides, both were lost. They didn't even get to the middle. They didn't even get to the worst of it. Everything that humanity threw at this thing, everything on the ground, everything they flew in, everything on the sea, everything that was remote that could try and read into it from a distance, nothing worked. Everything failed. The rain was so heavy, radar couldn't penetrate it. The clouds were so high, the satellites couldn't see. It was completely opaque. It was like a black hole of weather. And they got no information about it. They got nothing. And then the government sent in their forensic teams, right? I'm a forensic engineer. I know how that works. They sent in their teams on the ground. They flew them in helicopters. They put them in there, and they couldn't figure it out. They couldn't figure it out. The destruction was so intense that there wasn't enough material to measure what was happening to the material. Imagine an earthquake that's so powerful, it knocks every building flat. Normally, you'd have a couple of buildings standing, and you would say, well, this earthquake was bad enough to flatten that building, but not this one. So based on the buildings and how they were constructed and how old they were, we'll estimate that the damage, the earthquake pressure at this point is this or it's that. And they couldn't do that because there was nothing left standing. You understand? There was nothing at all. And that made sense to me. Because every time I tried to approach this incident to try and understand what happened to us, it was always just going around and around it. And I thought that the media were deliberately trying to obfuscate what happened. But according to this guy, nobody knows. They estimate it. They talk about it among themselves, but they have no idea. And then he told me, look, we've been knowing for decades that our methods for categorizing these events, these hurricanes, are inadequate. And there's a group of people in his field of work who are trying to get a new category, category 6. There are 5 categories in the Saffir-Simpson scale. You probably know all this. It goes as far as high as category 5, and category 5 means everything is destroyed. They're trying to add a category 6 because they know that there are hurricanes that are now way above category 5. And trying to get a category 6 established, for research purposes, so you can talk about these things. It's not category 5, it's category 6, right? So it's significant. It's more significant than you thought it was because it's a category 6. And that's off the charts for category 5. And so we have to pay attention to it differently. They can't get it passed. They can't get it agreed to. Nobody wants to have a category 6. And the dark secret is category 5 means everything at or above 157 miles an hour in the wind. And they like it that way. They don't want to talk about things that are worse than that because people are acclimated, apparently, to that scale. And anything above that is going to become terrifying. And he just told me this: we can't even talk about these events. We can say it was a Category 5 hurricane, and everyone thinks they know what that means. And we can say the winds were higher than 157 miles per hour because that makes it Category 5, and everyone thinks they know what that means. No one can talk about it. They don't have any of the tools or even the language to discuss this thing. And then he said, there's a bunch of scientists, and they're not publishing anything. And they're only talking to each other in privacy. But they're starting to talk about a thing called a hypercane. 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 Not hurricane. Hypercane. Hyper. Hypercane. You can look it up in Wikipedia. They're now talking about hypercanes. And they don't think we actually need a Category 6. What we need is a Category 10. Yeah, that's what I said. 10. Category 10. And given all the pushback they're getting for a Category 6, they're not going to get a Category 10. They can't even talk about it. They can't talk about these. Hypercanes are supposed to be theoretical. There's never been one. It's strictly mathematics that, yes, if conditions are this way and they're that way, you could have hurricanes that basically defy categorization. Hence, no need for a Category 6. They defy categorization, and winds would be as high as 400, maybe 500 miles an hour. 2,000 miles across. That when they're over water, they spin up, and when they're over land, they just keep going. They're just so huge and have so much energy and so much violence that they can't even slow down when they're over land. And then when they leave the land and they go into another ocean, they find more energy and they spin up again. And then they go to another continent and they cross that continent, and they just keep going. He told me, there's a dirty secret about this event a year ago when he and I were discussing it. It was a year after the event. He said, this thing, when it left the Gulf of Mexico, the wind field was so big and there was so much rain coming down that it wetted the landscape ahead of it until there was, across the entire eastern part of the U.S., there was everywhere 3 to 6 inches of water, hot water, warm water, hot water. And as it passed over the U.S., the continental U.S., and it rained, it thought it was still over the ocean. And the land being hot from the sun and the water being on the hot land, it was able to gather energy from the land, and it continued across. And we know this is what happened. It changed size a little, but it plowed through Alabama and Georgia and the Carolinas. It went back out to sea, thank God. And it was back out to sea. Then the U.S. stopped talking about it. But then it became a problem for the U.K. They started talking about it. They gave it another name. They talked about it completely different. We didn't even know they were talking about it. They were talking about it after we'd given up on it. And it went through the UK. No one in the US knows this. Everybody in the US, in the UK knows it, but they don't know that what happened in the US. So it went through the UK. And it was, 300 miles across. It blew the place to pieces. And then it went ashore in Europe, crossed the English Channel, picked up more moisture, picked up more heat, ended up in northern France on the border with Belgium, blew that place to rat shit. And it crossed over across Europe, crossed over Italy, ended up in the Mediterranean, picked up more energy, blew Italy apart, destroyed everything. The Italians knew, but the people in the UK didn't care anymore. And the people in the US had so many problems of their own that they couldn't even care what was happening in Italy. And if it was happening in Italy, it's probably a different storm. And they have their storms and we have ours. It was the same storm. No one understood this except for the scientists who were watching this nightmare unfold. And then it passed into Turkey, killed 76,000 people, just flooded them, drowned them, before it passed into Lebanon and Israel, and it passed into Saudi Arabia, and then it passed into the Gulf of Arabia, picked up more energy, killing people as it goes. This thing was huge. It never stopped being huge. It just kept going. And finally, it went down to Africa, came ashore in Africa, killed another 55,000 people, blew into Africa, and died. It was a hypercane, as near as we've ever seen. It was a hypercane. It fit all the definitions. And while they had no measurements anywhere for the central barometric pressure or the central wind field, they thought they had an idea that the winds were at least 400 miles an hour, maybe closer to 500. And I told him that explained a lot. From what I saw, that explained a lot. And I told him, you know what? We were in the second floor of this parking structure. In the water, there was water into the wheel wells of the car. And there was bodies floating in the headlights of my car while I was still awake. I saw it. And when morning come, there was still water in there from the debris. But the debris had been blown in after the water had come up. And he said there was a storm surge. There was a storm surge. And that was the first I'd ever heard of it. In the entire year, I had been wrapped up in this thing, and having even survived it, it was the first time I'd ever heard anyone mention a storm surge. He said, yes, it came in off the Gulf of Mexico, went all the way inland, 60 miles inland. And where you were, that water was salt water. And that was storm surge. And he and I figured out how high that must have been and how much water that was. And while we were in the restaurant finishing our meal, he got one of his friends on the phone, and they talked about that. And then they got another friend on a three-way call, and they talked about it. And they had a conversation of 20 minutes on the phone. And that turns out to be that observation on my part, that observation and that phone call, and that was the only data they had ever over what happened, because they couldn't even get in there to measure anything for 2 days. And by the time they flew in there, the storm surge had retreated, and they had no data on how high it had gotten. And if I hadn't had that conversation with that climatologist, he would have never known. And just based on their phone call, they decided that the wind to drive that much water that far inland must have been at least 400 miles an hour. And that's another story. That's another story you could tackle as journalists. How is it that we, modern humanity, can still have no idea what happened that day, that week? It lasted it was a couple of days. How can we not know? Who dropped the ball? Is there a conspiracy? Is there just ignorance? Is everybody just happy talking their way through this? Do they simply not want to know? Or do they know and they can't talk about it? I'm under an NDA. I was until yesterday. Maybe more people are. Or maybe they're just fearful for their careers. Maybe talking about this is a career limiting move. They want to know what happened. They want to know how that happened. They're scientists, physicists. What does it mean? What does it mean, for fuck's sake? Yes, 800-mile wide debris field, everything dead. But what does it mean for us? What is happening to our planet? How could this happen? What does it mean? Does it mean anything? Does it mean nothing? Yes, you could follow that story. You could do that. You want to do journalism? Please do some journalism. We don't understand. We're like chimps trying to understand the lightning. We don't get it. This was too big. It was too powerful. It came too quickly. It overwhelmed everything. It killed everyone, destroyed our theories. It didn't even fit within our theories. It doesn't fit within meteorology. It doesn't fit within satellite analysis. Nothing. We can't measure it. We still don't know what it looked like on the inside. Every instrument we threw at it came back with question marks. What does it mean? Hypercanes. What does it mean? How can we wrap our heads around this? At the same time, that people just don't get it. It's happy talk and we'll be fine. This happens all the time. Go to people, go to any town in Florida or Texas or Louisiana or Alabama as a hurricane rolls in and ask them, how do you feel about this? They're going to say the same thing. This happens all the time. It's nothing. They blow it out of proportion. Hypercanes. I had another thought recently to put all this in perspective. All that debris, trees piled up, they're still there to this day. And, they'll compress. And eventually, they'll be buried by sediment, right? The wind will blow the sand and the dirt and they'll get buried. They'll get buried. And they'll go down deeper and deeper into the ground, being buried. And if you go to places around the US, you can find coal seams that are 20 feet deep, full of plant matter, plant material, extinct trees and ferns and cycads and all this stuff that was ancient 300 million years ago. They got piled up and compressed into coal. And I've never heard an adequate explanation for why it is that there are some places where you find coal in bands 20 feet deep. That's trees and plants that got buried. No one ever asked that question. I never asked that question. I never thought about it. When I think about those piles of trees and lumber and everything else blown into huge piles, mountains of debris, I think about that later, being underground and being compressed into a coal seam 20 feet deep. And when I think about that, that makes me think, we've had hypercanes before. We've had a lot of them. This planet may have been dominated by a weather pattern like that. Maybe forests would grow and they grow quickly and they'd get all high and they'd get thick and then some hypercane would come along and just blow it all down and cut it off of the ground and pile it up in huge drifts and blow the sands and sediment over it and set it all down in the ground. And year after year after year, and century after century, for millions of years, hundreds of millions of years, hypercanes blowing over the landscape, storms like you can't imagine. Why would it do that? Well, the earth was hotter. The seas were hotter. It was a hothouse earth. And what are we doing today? What's happening today? Hothouse earth. The earth is getting hotter, right? Global heating, right? Global heating. We're bringing it all back. It's all coming back. It's all coming back. I just feel it. I just know it. I don't know how I know it. It's just one thing leading to another. The piles of brush and the coal seams and the hypercanes and the destruction and shearing everything off like a lawnmower. It's just, yes, we could bring that all back. The earth could get so hot and the water so hot and the land so hot that it just brings it all back. There's a story there. There's science there. Is anybody going to look at it? Can you get anyone to look at this and answer my questions? Could we be going that direction? And what does that mean for humans? What was the world like 300 million years ago? Is there any place for us in a world like that? Where would we live? Underground? In the sky? In floating cities above the hurricanes? In a world like that, where are we? I don't know. I don't have the answers. I have the questions. I have the data. I have the observations. And I'm no longer under an NDA. So do what you can with all that. Well, thanks for letting me rant. I appreciate it. Like I said, it's been a long 2 years. And I feel a little better, I guess. Good luck. Good luck getting your documentary out there. If you do, let me know. Let me know how it turns out. When? You think it's when you do? That's what you're thinking? I'm an engineer. Words have meaning. When I said if, I meant if. Good luck. So I am not Stan Cruikshank. I'm an actor. In fact, I'm the executive producer for this video. We do have a video of Dr. Cruikshank. But we decided not to use him in his account and instead use an actor, myself. The account is from a transcript from the video, and I'll tell you why we decided to do this. After our interview with Dr. Cruikshank, as we had told him we would do, we went out into the field to find other people with similar credentials and similar exposure to the event in question, and we talked to them, and it became apparent to us, and somewhat informed by his warning in this regard, that people were not able to talk about what happened. And the reasons they were not able varied. Certainly, there was very little data. There had not been time to digest what had happened. We were told that science, the wheels of science, turn slowly, and it takes a long time for scientists to agree on what an unusual event means, what it's caused by, what it reveals to us about the topics at hand, like meteorology and cyclogenesis and the like. Some people just told us stories. We even talked to people from Florida, who claimed it didn't happen. It just didn't happen. That it's blown out of proportion, that it's just an exaggeration, that you can go out and you can drive through northern Florida and you don't see anything like what people have been reporting. Maybe we'll verify that. I don't know. I don't see any reason to. We're just a small production company. And if you go on Google Maps, it looks like it always did. It's strange. The towns, the forests, there's no sign of anything ever having happened. Something happened. And we don't know what to think about it. As a species, we don't know what we're heading into. I'm convinced of it. So we decided to do this documentary based entirely on Dr. Cruikshank's discussion with us. That was not what we told him we were going to do. So we thought it was fair to contact him and let him know there had been a change of plans and that his entire discussion was going to be the entire content of our documentary. To our surprise and to our initial dismay, we were not able to contact him through the same means that we had used to set up that meeting. We did have his lawyer's business card, and we called her, and she was kind enough to talk to us. And she said that 2 months after the date that she knew he was coming to talk to us, Dr. Cruikshank and his family decided to disappear. She helped them with that, with the documentation they would need, and was prepared to share that they were doing well in an undisclosed location far away from all of this. So that's what we have. We don't know what we're going to do with this. We don't know what we're going to do with the other material. We're not sure we can follow up with the types of journalism he recommended. We think he's right. There's something wrong. There's something wrong. There's something wrong with the people. There's something wrong with the science. And more particularly, there is almost certainly something wrong with the Earth. What is it? Climate change? Global heating? Was it a fluke? Or, as Dr. Cruikshank believes, we're going somewhere. And the best measure of where we're going is 300 million years ago. And where humans fit in that scenario, it's impossible to guess. Science fiction, I guess, is the best we have. Okay, guys, is that a wrap? How'd I do? Yeah, that was tough. Did you notice me having trouble? Yeah, that was rough. I wasn't even in the storm, and man, I'm glad I wasn't. All right, well, we're here. Do we need to redo any parts of it? Grace, anything? All right. Then I guess it's a wrap. I hope you sons of bitches left me some pizza and a beer because I could really use a couple of beers. Grace, you okay? Okay. It's a wrap. Oh, shoot. I got to turn this camera off. Okay, hold on. Let's do this right. Remember, it's science fiction, but only until it's no longer fiction. End of reel. 3, 2, 1.